Hello, my name is Christy Lohman-Killough, and I am a teacher at Capstone High School in Capstone, California. I currently teach 3 sections of U.S. history, 1 section of AP U.S. history, and 1 section of Avid 9. For this action research project, I chose to focus it on helping students acquire the skills to identify fake news. For this action research, I focused on 2 periods of my U.S. history class, which is 11th graders. One assignment that my students are currently doing and have done throughout the school year is current event assignments, where they are asked to find an article relating to America in some way. They can use online sources. A lot of them choose social media platforms to find news stories. And they write up 5 facts, they summarize the article, they identify the purpose, the audience, if there's any bias represented in the article, and then they write a reflection. And since a lot of students are finding these news stories on social media sites and online sources, I thought it might be beneficial to my students to help them identify real news stories from fake news stories. And this had become a major buzz or topic with the Stanford study that came out, where a lot of students were having a hard time identifying the credibility and evaluating online sources. To give you a little bit of background about Capstone High School, it's located in the Central Valley of Merced County, California. It's located in a small rural community. The town itself has approximately 5,600 residents. Capstone High School itself has just over 600 students. The high school turned 103 years old and has recently been in the news for having to comply with the new state law AB 30, where we're changing the mascot from a Native American mascot to something that was more acceptable. To start my project, I had to identify what my students' needs were, and I took some of the pre-assessments that the Stanford study team had done with the students that they tested to see how my students would relate in comparison to those students that took the test with the Stanford study. I did this with 2 of my class periods in my U.S. history class, which was 48 students. I assessed the student responses based on a 3-part rubric, which had a spot for mastery, emerging, and beginning. Here is what the first part of the pre-assessment looked like. So the students were given a sample of a home page, and you can see that it's pointing to 3 different areas of the home page, and students are being asked to identify whether or not it is an advertisement, and then provide evidence as to why they believe it is an advertisement or why they believe it is not. Here is a sample of the rubric that was used to assess the student responses. If we look first at question 1, the students were able to identify, for the most part, 72% were able to identify that it was an advertisement, and the evidence was the coupon code, the way that you could click off of the ad, limited time only. These types of things signaled the students, and they were able to easily identify that it was an ad. The second question asked students to look at this particular story here to identify whether or not it was an advertisement or not, and give evidence. And again, students were able to identify that it was not an advertisement, and mostly identified that by saying that there was an author, so that signaled to them that it wasn't an advertisement. The third question, this one here, is where a lot of my students had a hard time, and they pretty much split almost 50-50 on either being able to identify it as an advertisement and provide evidence for, or not being able to. And those that were able to said that it sponsored content signaled to them that it was an advertisement. The second part of the pre-assessment provided students with this photograph, and it's labeled the Fukushima nuclear flowers, and they were asked to provide strong evidence if this photograph provided strong evidence that it was about the conditions living near the Fukushima power plant. And most of my students had a difficult time with this because they feel like the picture was representative, and they weren't really able to explain why it could not be representative. And so you can see that there is a larger percentage of beginning and emerging and a lower percentage of mastery. So this signaled to me that analyzing visual text was going to be something that students really needed to practice in order to identify the credibility and evaluate resources online. My research question: how will analyzing both real and fake news stories in my class affect students' critical reading skills? And some of my supplemental questions: how will using real and fake news stories increase students' ability to identify bias in media-based content? And how will strengthening students' critical reading strategies affect student analysis of primary source documents? For the first phase of my action research, I laid it out in 6 class periods, and we did these on Fridays because I felt like introducing the analysis of fake versus real news stories would dovetail nicely off of the current event assignment. To start, I used some social media. So I had the students analyze a tweet and a Facebook post. They had to identify if the Facebook post and the tweet were credible or not, and what signaled that they were credible. And then the next group meeting, in small groups, the students shared the evidence that they identified within the tweet and the Facebook post. While they were sharing in their small groups, I circulated the classroom and took notes on a seating chart as to what was being discussed. And then we came together, whole class, and made a working list on the whiteboard. Next, I modeled for the students how to analyze a tweet and a Facebook post using a think aloud, and then students went back and analyzed the tweet and the Facebook post to see what they may have missed or what they got similar to what I did. The next time we met, students were given 2 articles. One was real and one was fake. The students read individually and annotated the articles. Then I informed the students that one of the articles was a fake news story, and they had to apply their critical analysis skills to identify which story they believed was real and which one they believed was fake. They shared with their groups. They provided evidence to their claim, and then they shared out whole class. And the next time that our class met, students shared their evidence with their small groups while I circulated the classroom and made notes on the seating chart. And then we came back together and students shared in the whole group. And finally, students wrote a reflection that responded to an essential question of why is it important to be able to determine between real and fake news stories. And they answered that in their interactive notebook. For the tweet and the Facebook post, I used the similar 3-part rubric for assessing the student responses, and a lot of my students were in the beginning part of the rubric, so this signaled to me that there needs to be more practice in analyzing things like Facebook and tweets. And this was for the Facebook post. The second half of my action research was based on a supplemental question of applying these critical reading skills and these critical analysis skills to primary source documents, which is a major part in the history curriculum. So to start with phase 2, students responded to a quick write in their interactive notebooks on what was a primary source document or what it is, and to provide examples. And then students shared what they wrote, and as a whole class we made a working list of what would be considered a primary source document. And it was something that we could continually add to as we went through this portion of the action research. The next day, students were provided with a written, a visual, and a song lyric primary source document, which they analyzed, applying their critical analysis skills. And while they were working on it, I circulated the room making notes on the seating chart. The next day, students were asked to consider whether or not any of the primary source documents, or what would happen if a primary source document might be considered fake. And students responded to that in their interactive notebooks, and adding to the essential question, which they responded to previously, why it is important to identify fake news. Considering that I was running out of time, I had to alter my plan. For phase 2, students were provided with primary source documents and a writing prompt, and they analyzed the primary source documents and then used the analysis of those to respond to the writing prompt, which was based on a civil rights topic which we were discussing, as that was the unit we were in. Overall, I feel that this action research project has helped me identify areas that can make me a better teacher and a more effective teacher. It helps me understand my students and their needs. It helps the students become more critical of the media that they encounter on a daily basis. It helps students practice their critical analysis skills, which can be applied to not just social media or online sources that they're viewing, but content that they come in contact with in other areas. And it's something relevant and something that students can apply immediately. And I also feel that this action research project helped me establish a stronger student-teacher relationship and rapport with my students.